All right, this is a real big one. Um, in this one, I'm going to go through 25 different positions, all from randoms, usually the same hands, just switching the cards around, but between levels 4 and 10, and go through 25 different randoms with corners as the starters and see if we can capture and what happens. And we're going to talk a little about what rate are these good moves. We know there's sometimes good moves, but is that, 50% of the time? Is that 5% of the time? How often should we be expecting this to be a good move? Of course, no starter type should always be our preference in open. Maybe in closed, you can reliably get away with, meeting one type of starter with a certain type of response most of the time. That's not going to be the case in open. And so I don't really know what percentage of the time we should expect moves to be good. But that's one thing we're going to consider here. We're going to have lots of examples. After each one, I'm going to ask you, well, probably going to not say it every time, but for you to pause, think, is there a nice path with capturing their corner starter? And see if you can correctly identify when it's promising and when it isn't. And a lot of the time it's not going to be. I will say now it is nowhere close to 50%. Do I think this is a promising path to take? But it's also very much not zero. And so hopefully you can identify some of the times it looks good and a lot of the times that it doesn't look good and we should look for other moves. So, okay. I'm going to talk a little more about just capturing corner starters in general. So with the coverage so far, the ideal plan is we've been thinking of this in terms of plans. I capture and then I play my next move here. And that means the opponent's move recapturing is basically an automatic move, and our next move is kind of locked in early. And that means there are a lot of moves in the game that are going to be automatic, which reduces the number of moves where either player has to think or is risking making significant error. It essentially reduces the number of complex decisions in a game, which means I don't think it's surprising that capturing corner starters is going to lead to more ties than other move types will, because it gives opponents fewer chances to make mistake and gives you fewer chances to make mistake as well. And I sort of got into that a little last time, but I wanted to say a little more on it. And this says there are only 9 games of Triple Triad. That's a typo. There are only 9 moves in a game of Triple Triad. And the more that are easy to make, the closer we get to just tying a lot. So I do think this is a weapon that will lead to more ties than other more complex but also less forceful type of plays. Because as we'll see, a lot of these can be really complex, but they're forcing. The action happens immediately, and we're not left with vague, not clear what's doing what yet. So here we're going to be looking at random games, and random games work out, unsurprisingly, quite different than non-random games. So in my experience, corner captures get more complicated the higher the level. Specifically, when you take something, if you take by overpowering, which is going to happen more often in randoms than it will in games with hands, because games with hands, your cards are very much cards that are really good at taking things with plus wall or other features. And in random games, your cards aren't going to line up nearly so nicely. So you're going to have a lot more times where you're just overpowering rather than taking with a rule. And also, because you start getting cards that have 9s and 10s on them, suddenly low outfacing numbers like 2s, 3s, or 4s, if you take something in 1 with a card in 4, whatever it has facing down is suddenly a lot more likely to get B+ wallable the higher the level. And so there are more situations where when you take their starter, they can just immediately combo everything back without having to recapture from the square next to their starter. And so that's going to make these more difficult to play and give our opponent more options in a lot of situations. So I think the higher the level, the less we're going to be expecting these moves to work. And I think you'll see that a lot of the examples where it works in ways we've seen it before are going to be lower level examples. Another thing is control of 5 has been incredibly important. After a sequence of they go in 1, we capture from 2, they recapture from 4. A lot of times we've been playing in 3 or 7, never 5, but we've been playing in 3, caring more about controlling 5, setting up something in 6 against 5, than we have cared about having 3 be safe. And in random games with weaker cards, less designed to work together, worse at plus walling, but also just not fitting as cleanly, it's going to be a lot harder to set up combos against what they do. And therefore, it's going to be harder to keep control of 5, much harder, which is really bad for our game plan. And instead, building up safety and finding safe plays in the corners is going to be much more relevant. And often the way we end up playing these positions is we're not able to control 5, and we can still do well enough with safety, but we won't be able to get that control that we saw in previous examples. And so this all makes it quite complicated, and depending on the rules, whether it's random, non-random, what the level is, starter captures differ in how good they are and what they're trying to do. And I think this makes it easy to say, yeah, they're not very good. And I think their rate of being good moves is relatively low compared to other starter responses, especially in random and higher level games. But I still think it's worth knowing about, and I still think we'll see it is quite effective in random. But if you've been saying, these are all garbage, this is bad, you're lying to me, you may feel somewhat vindicated by this video, but I hope not, because there are lots of situations where I think it's going to be a good move, and some situations where I think it is the best move, the move that puts the most pressure on the opponent. So, okay, let's go to our first example. And for all of these, just think pause. Feel free to pause the video for as long as you want. I'm going to go through my thoughts. My thoughts are often going to be pretty quick. I won't cover every move, so you might have covered something that's really important or interesting and I just don't mention it, because these are kind of my quick thoughts on each position, what move I would be drawn to, why I'd be drawn to it, why I think it's promising or isn't. And if you have a different idea, that may well be a good idea. I'm just not going to cover everything. So stop and think kind of, here's how I'd capture, and when they recapture, here's what I intend to do next. Can you find a good plan? And if it doesn't look like there's a good plan, you can just say, I don't think there's a good plan. And most of the time, you're going to be right, because more often than not, this will not be a great type of move. Though again, is any move going to be, consistently great over 50% of the time? It depends so much on their hands and our hands, and I think expecting one move to carry you in, a majority of your games is underrating how difficult and complex and interesting a game triple triad is. It's okay. Feel free to pause and think about the position. So our only capture is 6, 7, 1, 4, and 2, and they're going to recapture 5, 2, 5, 7, and 6. And the question is, do we have a good follow-up? And we can play 4, 5, 3, 7, and 9, which is safe, but it doesn't take their card in 6, and it doesn't control 5. It doesn't limit any of their options in 5. And also note, after our starter 6, 7, 1, 4, and 2, they could just combo us 5, 7, 5, 1, and 1. And this is something that's rarer at these low levels, but still pops up from time to time. And just generally, this all looks unappealing. And I think a big reason it's so unappealing is because we're capturing their starter with a low number facing 5. And that's going to make it much harder for us to stop them having useful access to 5 later. So I think here capturing is not appealing. This is not what we're looking for out of a starter capture. And I would look for another move. We can start setting up combos against their starter. There are lots of other ways to play that I think should be preferred here. So here's another instance. And again, as soon as I switch to a new diagram, that would be a good time to pause because I might just start talking. So here again, we have only one way to capture, 6, 7, 1, 4, and 8. And note, we're really bad going down with this red hand, right? Our highest numbers of 5. We've got this 1, this 2, this 3, this 4, this 5. We're very bad going down. And that would instantly make me go, I want to play towards the top of the board. I might play in 3. I might play somewhere up there. I want to direct the game away from this card that was just played. And 6, 7, 1, 4, and 8 really directs it downwards. And so I'd be very scared about them just playing in 7 and making the game entirely facing down. And they can go with 5, 7, 5, 1, and 7, which combos us, and then they just have 3 cards locked up and we have no down power to take anything, and this looks like a disaster. So I do not like this move at all. But I do think it's interesting if we look at what they could do in 6 as well. If they take 3, 3, 7, 6, and 6, then the only card they can take our card in 8 from 5 with is Tonberry, 5, 2, 7, 5. So if we could find a move in 7 that sets up combos against Tonberry, we'd be in pretty good shape. So I really like the sequence for us, 6, 7, 1, 4, and 8. And if they make a mistake and go 3, 3, 7, 6, and 6, we could go 7, 5, 2, 5, and 7. And that card's safe. And our card in 8 can only be taken by Tonberry, which we now have a plus on in 6, 2 different ways. And I think that looks pretty promising. However, they could also take with Tonberry in 6, and this is going to be a little harder to set up against because it's harder to find a way to combo 5275. Or sorry, 3376 than it was 5275 because the 6 is harder for us to line up against. And the only way to do so is to play 4537 and 7, but that's going to be capturable by them multiple ways, and we can't combo those captures back, for instance 5751. So all in all, I think capturing here gives blue a lot of options. They should go in 7, but they can also go in 6 and give us a lot of trouble. And I think in general, our hand is so bad at going down that capturing a starter like this that helps direct the game down is just very unlikely to be good. Alright, so this one, we can be more optimistic immediately. The game's already directed up, and we have cards that are looking up. And we have lots of ways to capture, which makes this one hard to calculate because, how many different cards do we have that can take from 2? We have 2 cards that can take from 2. We have 3 cards that can take from 4. This is a lot. So how can we narrow it down without having to calculate each one? And I think the instinct should be, how can we have a really high number facing 5? Because if we have a high number facing 5, when they recapture, hopefully they won't be able to set up something to take our card that just took their starter, and we can play next to it and have some safe cards facing out. And then another thing to do is, if we capture, how are they intending to capture back? Because if they capture back with a high number facing 5, then we could start building around that card, we could play next to that card, and hopefully that would be safe. And again, they wouldn't have a move in 5. So the thing that really jumps out at me is, their 3376 is their only recapture in 2. So if we can force them to play that 7 facing down can be really useful for us to build around. So I like the idea of capturing in 4 and forcing them to play 3376 and 2. So one move that jumps to mind is 6714 and 4, which has a 7 facing 5 that seems really promising, and it draws out their 3376. But the problem is that sets them up with multiple pluses in 5 and us up with no pluses in 5. And they're on first turn, which means because we never block 5 there, they're going to have first access to 5, and they have both combos there and we have none. And we want them not to have anything in 5 rather than to have everything in 5. So I don't like that move at all, and instead we should try to take their starter in such a way that we don't set up 5 for them. And I think a nice way to do it is 7525 in 4. They recapture 3376 and 2. And now we can play 4537 and 3. And the idea is they have no move in 5. And with 7525 and 4, we have helped set up combos against their captures in 6. Because we've played 4537 and 3. Did I say 4? I meant 3 if I said 4. Sorry. So the line again is we play 7525 and 4. They recapture their starter with 3376 and 2. And then, now that they don't have a move in 5 that can take 2, we capture the card in 2 from 3 with 4537. They don't have a move in 5, and if they go in 6, say with 5275, we now have combos in 5 with 3646 that we set up with the way we captured their starter with 7525. And I think this is a pretty good position. Blue will be under some pressure to find a tie. I think this is a nice way to take. And the indicators kind of that it would be are, we have a very up-facing hand and we want to keep the game directed towards kind of the top of the board or side to side. And thus, by playing next to their starter, we keep the game directed that way. I think that's very useful. Another is, we saw they could only recapture their starter one way, and that way had a high number facing out towards 5, and that let us look to build around it. And then I looked for a move that I could play in 4 that would set up to be able to combo stuff they could play later in 6. And that led me to the idea of 4537 and 3. This is very much like we've been studying till now. The idea of a move in 3 is not necessarily to be safe, but to control 5 and to not give them options in 6. Here we did so, and we red have a really good situation here. Hopefully that one made sense. It was a bit complicated. So here we again have a lot of ways to capture. We're now switching over to the blue hand. We have 5751 and 4. We have 5275 and 4, and we have 3376 and 4. Which one appeals? So for me, immediately, I think 5751. We really want that high out facing towards 5. That gives us something we can build around. And a nice feature is our opponent has nothing they can slide in 1 that takes our card in 4. In fact, our card in 4 is simply untouchable, which makes it even better. It can only be taken if they combo back their starter. So it seems to me 7, 5, 2, 5, and 8 for them is basically forced. And that will flip our capturing card. So they will be up 6-4. But now we can look to build. So they do have moves in 5 there, which is pretty important. And so that's the one real downside to this move, and that's why I'd start to move off it, because if they weren't set up for 5 there, it would be easy for us to start building. But given that they have the plus in 5, and we don't, I don't like it. But we do see 7, 5, 2, 5, and 8 is their only recapture of their starter, and that has a 7 facing up. So really what we should be looking for is what can we play in 4 such that when they recapture in 8, they don't have a combo, and then we can play in 9, taking their card in 8, and we know they're terrible going down because we've seen that over and over in these examples, and then we'll have locked up the cards in 8 and 9 and have a really good position. And so we don't want to give them combos in 5. So for instance, if we played 3, 3, 7, 6, and 4, and they played 7, 5, 2, 5, and 8, it would give both of us combos in 9, because they're 4, 5, 3, 7 in 5, because their 4, 5, 3, 7 would have the plus in 5. So instead, the move I really like here is 5, 2, 7, 5, and 4. They recapture. We can then play 6, 4, 2, 6, and 9, and the cards in 8 and 9 are ours. They have no combo in 5. They are in a ton of trouble. I think this is probably the best move against Red Starter. Not just like this is a good move, this puts on pressure, but I think 5, 2, 7, 5, and 4 is the best move here against Red Starter. And if we're not looking for kind of ways to capture a starter when they can take back, we're going to miss moves that are really strong. Because again, I think it's the best move. So okay, we move up a level. We're now using level 5 cards. We only have one way to capture their starter in 4 with 7, 6, 6, 3. They capture back in 2 using 3, 7, 3, 7. And they have the plus in 5 with 7, 1, 7, 4. And we know it's really bad when first turn has the plus in 5. We need to have much better use of 5 than they do, or we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, they only have one card they can play in 5, so we might think, okay, as long as we can control that card by playing in 7 or 3, then maybe we can, be in a good situation, because they only have one natural move in 5. But I don't see a way to control it, and I think this is just a situation where we gotta say, no, we can't take their starter. They take back easily. They have better access to 5. We don't really have a way to build around it. Don't want to be capturing their starter. Okay. Against this one, again, we only have one capture, so it's easy to check. Our only capture is 1, 7, 7, 3, and 4, which nicely has a high number facing towards 5. That gives, a reason for optimism already. And that high number is, as I said, more important than it was in the hand games, because it is much harder for our opponent to be setting up pluses and sames and squares like 5, and so that high number is often just going to be unbeatable. So we have some problems, though, with this move, which is, one, they could just go in 1, and we are very weak going left, and we won't be able to fight their cards in 1 and now 4, and I think that's already, pretty bad looking. And you'll notice in these random games, going not necessarily recapturing the starter, but if one side has a directional weakness, just going in the corner and taking the card you captured with can be really scary. But also, if they do recapture their starter, if they play 3, 7, 3, 7, and 8, they have a plus in 5 with 5, 6, 6, 2, because 7 plus 2 equals 6 plus 3. We do not. It's going to be really tough there. We have to try to control their combos in 5. This is difficult. Also, if they play 3, 7, 3, 7, and 8, they have a plus wall 2 different ways on it in 9. We have no plus walls. So even if we do somehow get off something good in 5, they can just combo back in 9. This looks terrible to me. I do not like taking their starter here at all. All right. I decided to throw a few of these in here. Blue can take their starter and red cannot take back. This is a terrible starter. I admit this is not a great example for showing that capturing corners is good, because of course this is a very bad move and if a move is a good reply only when they do very bad things, it's not very useful, because we all know to capture starters in these situations. I do think, though, it's worth saying which card should we take with. And I think an understanding that we should have is really important here, which is that a high number facing 5 is still going to be useful to us. Because if we play 5, 6, 6, 2 in 4, they can't capture that from 5. The only capture they have from 7, we can combo back. And so that's going to be much harder for them to deal with. While the 7, 1, 7, 4 in 4, that way to capture their starter, they're going to have a few more tools in terms of how to deal with it, because any of their cards in 5 can capture it. Man, this is going to be an exhausting video for me, and probably for you too, if you are pausing on each one of these and trying to solve them. So here's another one. We have 2 ways to capture. We have one way from 6 and one way from 8. Neither one will have a high number facing 5, so we should already feel, okay, I'm a little skeptical. Do any of their recaptures have a high number facing 5? No, those have low numbers facing 5 too. So it seems unlikely for this to work. One example line is if we play 3, 7, 3, 7 in 8, they can play 1, 7, 7, 3 in 6. And we do have the combo in 5, but they do too. And we very rarely can play in 5 safely. If we combo in 5 there, they can go in 7 with 7, 6, 6, 3, and they combo stuff back. Because we're basically never able to play in 5 in those setups after cards in 6 and 8, then we're giving them 5, and they also have the plus in 5 with 7, 6, 6, 3. So this all looks really bad to me. I don't like this line. It's not promising. And I should note, when I say something's not promising, I don't mean it's a forced loss. There may well be a sneaky tie in there somewhere. There may well be a few ties in there. But it's not kind of comprehensible. I don't understand at a heuristic level. I could only get there through calculation, extensive calculation, what those ties would be. And I think, Triple Triad's a time-limited game. We do not want to be spending, 8 minutes trying to prove that we have this horrible looking move actually lead to a tie. So instead, lines that are promising are ones we can understand, ones that hopefully will give us a little leeway. We'll have multiple paths to either pressure them or get a tie, rather than having to walk a very narrow path just in the hopes of getting to a tie. So I'm not going to pretend, because maybe some of these lines I can find ties, that means the move was good and that means you should emulate this play, because what that will lead you to do is play really poor moves that get you in trouble, and maybe you can find a way out and maybe you can't, but your win rate will be much lower doing that than playing, good moves. So if many of these moves, I'll say, aren't promising, can in fact lead to ties, I still think they're not promising. I do not think that's how we want to be playing. And for successes for this idea, for capturing corner starters, I will only claim moves that I actually think put pressure on the other player or get us to really comfortable ties that are easy for us to get to. Because I think that's what we want to achieve out of our early moves. It isn't, I'm in a ton of trouble, but maybe I can scrape by. Instead, it's, I can put pressure on them, or I'm not in trouble. So here, again, I think this is just not a promising situation to take. And one of the really quick indicators of that is that we can't take with a high number facing 5, and we can't force them to take with a high number facing 5. All right, here's a kind of interesting one, because blue's hand is a bit of a mess. So we only have one way to capture their starter, 8, 2, 6, 6 in 4, and they can recapture with 5, 8, 2, 7 and 2. And these have low numbers facing 5. So if your instinct was, this looks not promising, let's move on, that makes a ton of sense. I think this one actually is pretty good and shows something cool about corner captures, which is because it's forcing, we know we can force a card out of their hand, the 5, 8, 2, 7. And all their other cards are kind of the same. They're slightly different left to right power, but they're basically the same card. And it's just really hard for blue to be in a good spot where they have 3 cards that are incredibly repetitive in what they do, and mostly not very good cards. So because our move is so forcing, it can force a card out of their hand, and that's the only card in their hand with particularly unique strengths. And that means getting it out of their hand is just likely to lead to a pretty good situation. We also, you'll notice, because their remaining hand will be so repetitive, they'll have 2 5s down. So those cards already can't go in 5 because our 7727 can combo them from 8. So I think just on a kind of general principle of their hand is really redundant, taking their starter has a lot of value because it can force the only viable card that doesn't do stuff the other cards do out of their hand. So I like this move here. I think capturing is a nice move and kind of shows how effective it can be at that is the card in your hand I have a problem with, and that's the card I'm going to force you to play. So I like capturing here. I think this is a nice example of something different capturing can achieve. So now we're switching over to being blue. We have many ways to take in 8, and no ways to take whatsoever in 6. So we're weak down, which makes me a little hesitant to make a move like 8, 7, 5, 3, and 8, because if they go in 7, we just don't have much down power. But it does seem that 2, 8, 8, 5 is good enough there, because it can combo any of their 7-ups. And while I'm hesitant to play it, because it is so much of our down power, I think it's powerful enough, and specifically being able to combo 7s up coming from 7 makes that just about survivable. So we can play something like 8, 7, 5, 3, and 8, and if they recapture in 6, then suddenly the move starts being a lot more hopeful because it has a high number facing towards 5, and so if we can slide along it in 7, we might have a pretty good setup. The problem, though, is they can meet it with 7, 5, 7, 3, and 6, and they have the plus in 5, and we don't. And we do have safe moves in 5 there, with our 8 up, and we will have a plus wall against 7, 7, 2, 7, and 5 when they play it with 2, 8, 8, 5, and 4. So we do have some tools there, and I think we're pretty likely to be able to manage a tie without that much trouble. The other way to take that makes sense to me, because we do not want to be using up our 2, 8, 8, 5. That is, generally speaking, our best card in this hand, because it has the least redundant power, is 5, 8, 2, 7 in 8. But after 3, 6, 8, 4, and 6, we have none of the advantages of the previous line. We don't really have good ways to fight over 5, because they have lots more cards they can put in 5 than they could in the last situation, when they only had the plus with 7, 7, 2, 7, so we know that had to be the card they were playing in 5. And second of all, we don't... Do I have another point? No, I think that's my only point there. So maybe we can squeak out of that one, but that one looks pretty bad. But I think 8, 7, 5, 3, and 8 just about works, and works somewhat safely. Not like a great move, but if we're feeling pretty bad about our hand here, probably should be, the hand's pretty bad, it is worth considering. Of course, a move like 2, 8, 8, 5, and 1 as our, response to their starter seems very appealing. It is safe, it is much stronger, but it does give up all our directional power, and I'm not sure it's better than a move like 8, 7, 5, 3, and 8. I think a player like Delial is really good at understanding you have that safe corner, that powerful card, you're going to have it for the whole game. Find a way to do something else useful and keep that incredibly powerful card in your hand. And so I think I'd prefer a move like 8, 7, 5, 3, and 8 to a 2, 8, 8, 5, and 1 here. Doesn't make it the best move. There's probably other stuff to find. But our hand does suck. I mean, it's so redundant. That 8, 3, 4, 5 and that 8, 4, 5, 6 are so bad that looking for a way to bail out and have a quick forcing line, I think this is a really appealing spot to go for the capture in 8. All right, we move on to level 8. That was level 7, right? So now we have high numbers like 9s, and as we go up, the closer we get to having 10s on the board, the more random numbers can be plus walled. I don't think that's going to be super relevant here, but it's something to consider. Just as we get higher and higher level, overpowering their starter is more likely to let them have just a plus wall on the other side rather than having to directly recapture their starter. So here we got a couple ways to take. 9, 1, 5, 8 in 6 can be met by 7, 5, 5, 8 in 2. I think fundamentally this is kind of unappealing. There are low numbers facing towards 5. We can go safely in 3 there with the 1, 1, 9, 9, for instance, but it doesn't really control 5. We can build out from it, though, and I think that's going to be more common in randoms and more common as we increase in level. That if there's a bunch of low stuff outfacing, like there is after this, we go 9, 1, 5, 8, and 4, they go 7, 5, 5, 8, and 2, that because the numbers facing out from squares will be so random and low and hard to set up pluses and sames with, because they're so much less consistent than the numbers are on lower levels. The lower levels, the fewer numbers are available, the more all the numbers will be the same and will line up. And higher levels, and especially a level like 8, where there are 1s going around as well as 9s, it can be very hard for the numbers to line up well. And that means a lot of taking will be overpowering, but it also means that overpowering will be vulnerable to future combos. And if you can just find kind of safe places to play and leave open some stuff that, yes, it can be taken, but it has low outfacing numbers, they have to be very careful about getting comboed back. And so I think building out safely starts being more and more relevant as we reach higher levels and starts to be useful here. So for instance, I think 9, 1, 5, 8, and 4, they play 7, 5, 5, 8, and 2. We play 1, 1, 9, 9, and 3. By all the principles we know, this does not seem very promising, but I think it's okay here. And if we have a chance... Oh, sorry, I keep confusing who has which cards. We play 9, 8, 1, 5, and 4. They play 7, 5, 5, 8, and 2, and of course we play 2, 5, 9, 9, and 3, 1, 1, 9, 9s in their hand. Sorry about that. But we also have 7, 9, 5, 2, so if we get another chance for a free move, maybe we'll play 7, 9, 5, 2, and 7. And that's one of those spots where we might not want to play 7, 9, 5, 2, and 7 immediately, because it can be taken from 4, but if 4 is occupied, it becomes a better move. So if you look at your hand, especially on higher levels, and think, I have a card I want to put in 7, but it's weak in the direction of their starter and strong facing away from it. Or I have a card in 3 and it's weak in the direction of their starter and strong facing away. Well, by taking their starter and having them take back, you fill up the squares 2 and 4, so suddenly the cards in 3 and 7 only have to be safe in one direction rather than 2 to be safe. And as I said, I think that safety starts mattering more and more the higher level the game is. So I don't love this move. I don't feel happy playing 9, 1, 5, 8, and 4 here, but I don't think it's bad. I think it has a point to it. There's a clear reason we can understand it, and it has some viability and specifically makes sense as a kind of move you might play on level 8 specifically and on higher levels. So not a terrible sequence, but the idea of going there and then following up by going in 3, or following up by probably 7's even better to go in first. So our sequence is 9, 1, 5, 8, 4, 7, 5, 5, 8, 2, and then say we play 7, 9, 5, 2, and 7. And I think this is okay. And our idea is to meet 5 with 3, which will hopefully be safe as well. And then we'll have decent cards for the endgame. I don't love it, but 8 can often be a level where stuff doesn't really line up well. And yeah. So I think this is a little different than the themes we've seen so far, but really shows that in randoms, we're not going to get these combos to line up as cleanly, and safety is going to matter a little more, because when the combos do line up, there's going to be a lot more overpowering, and finding ways to get a card safe forever are going to mean more than they've meant before, because it's harder to get our hands on, essentially. So, okay. Hopefully that was an interesting one. I'm a little worried I explained it poorly. Again, I don't love the move here, but I hope it made sense. Pause, figure out your move. So this one was, of course, a terrible starter. We can take it and they can't take back. Just truly awful from blue. Embarrassing move. So here, they cannot take back from 8. So that, again, makes it a kind of suspicious starter. But I do think there's a useful point of, if we're going to take their starter, do we still want a high number facing towards 5, or do we want a low number facing towards 5 if they can't take it back? And in a previous example, I said we still want a high number facing 5. And in that one, it was true because they had trouble taking it from... in that example, it was 7, but in this example, if we went in 6, the relevant square would be 3. Here, whatever we take with, they will have an easy time taking from 3. And so a move like 2, 5, 9, 9, and 6, they can sort of build up what I like to call like a phalanx, and play something in 3 that captures it, and they both have high outfacing values we can't deal with. And even worse, 1, 1, 9, 9 just has a plus wall. Again, the higher level we are, the more random things get hit by wall rules. You know, an outfacing 2 should not be hit by a wall that often, but the higher levels, the more stuff like that happens, which is some of the reasons some people complain a lot about a close combo. specifically on levels 8 and 9, I think, are the kind of worst offenders for just really random numbers getting comboed. So a more tempting move, I think, is 7, 6, 8, 5, and 6, which is just very good. We have a lowish number facing 5, so when they go in 3, we'll have an easier time taking it later. All right, this example, we cannot take their starter. There are, of course, lots of corner starters we do not have a way to take, and of course, capturing it isn't always available. This is a move type. It is not always there. And we move to level 9. Ugh, this has been exhausting for me, and if you've been pausing, I'm sure it has for you as well. So A861 immediately an 8 jumps out at me. It has a strong number facing towards 5, so maybe we can play it, and then next turn play something with a high out facing in 7, and hopefully have them both be safe and have a strong setup. But if they play in 7, they get that strong setup, right? They can play A7, 7, 1 in 7, and they have these 2 A's facing up, and that's going to be pretty hard for us to deal with. We don't really have natural setups there. Our hand has some downward power, but not at dealing with A's or setting up against A's. So I think that would be a pretty bad spot for us. And I don't see a move in 6 at the end to set up a good L for us because I don't see a way to set up threats in 5. So instead, another move is Sergeant Joe for A9-3 and 8, but they recapture their starter. We have a low number facing towards 5. It's likely to be good. To not be good. And we might think, okay, we could play in 5 there and take their card in 6 and that'll be safe, but 5 moves are always so risky. They give so many options. This is just not where we want to be playing. Maybe there's something good there after Sergeant Joe in 8 and they go A7, 7, 1, and 5, in 6. Maybe there's a move in 5, but if there is, you have to be so incredibly careful. I do not want to commit to that from the starting position. I'm sure there are better moves to find. This is just not how we want to be playing Triple Triad unless we're just praying for ties. So I don't like capturing their starter here. I think this is not a good situation for capturing the starter. All right. So here we have, I believe, only one way to capture it with 447A, and they recapture 6677, and we have the P in 5, right? We have 9486 in 5, so we have the plus if we want it, but of course we're never occupying 5 immediately, but it is nice to have the plus. I think we're never going to really, again, control 5. Controlling 5 gets harder and harder in these randoms. But I do like Sergeant Joe in 1 there for A9, 3, and 1. It is safe. We have a nice move in 5. We have ways to play in 7 with high out-facing value. Graph A8, 6, 1 in our hand is going to be a little bad. It probably not going to find a natural home. But I think this should be reasonable. And our idea is just we take their starter, we force them to occupy the square 4, and then Sergeant Joe in 1 will be safe. And Sergeant Joe in 1 would not be safe now, but, with this setup, we can make it an eventual safe corner. Because really what we're doing with the move in 4 and 8 is we're forcing the occupation of the squares 4 and 8, and that makes moves in 1 and 9 safer, and we'll take the safe 1 and 1. I don't love this move. I think this is a move I'd feel bad about playing, but I think you can manage a reasonably safe tie with it. Anything other than Sergeant Joe in 1 there, by the way, is just a huge disaster. We never want to be going 5. We don't have great moves in 9. For instance, A861, they can plus wall it. So we really have to be intending, if we're going to take their starter, to follow up with Sergeant Joe in 1. Alright, so what if we start with Sergeant Joe in 1? And now we are meeting this move. We are blue. So they can't retake from 2. Red cannot retake from 2. But they can combo all of our captures in 4 from 7. So if we play A7, 7, 1 in 4, they can combo us either with 9486 or 74A5. They have multiple ways to combo their card back. And if we take with A448, they can same wall with 447A. So I think this is a big reason that capturing corner starters can weaken as level goes up, is just a lot more of those numbers dangling down at the bottom that are often at lower levels irrelevant. If you have a 3 facing down at level 4, they can never plus wall it. That card is just not going to be relevant to combos except for kind of complex setups later. Here, just random numbers are much more easily comboed, and that means taking starters in ways that rely on overpowering are more likely to have an additional problem that they wouldn't have on lower levels. And so I think this is a big reason why this move type becomes more difficult to manage the higher the level is. Will it move? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so graph, we can take with 4, 5, 6, A, and 8, but again, that move gets same walled. Random numbers are just much more easily comboed. I'll say this over and over again. Another way to take it is 6, 6, 7, 7, and 4. They can play 4, 4, 7, 8 in 8, and we can start building out some safety. We can play a 9 with an A up, and there's some low outfacing numbers. It's a bit of a mess. This is one of those situations where in low levels it would be really unpromising, but as we get higher leveled and more random numbers and overpowering becomes a little awkwarder, I think these positions get more viable where you just kind of say, okay, I'm going to take their starter, I'll give them a safe corner, I'll get a safe corner of my own, there will be some low numbers facing out from the remaining cards. Those positions are usually okay-ish, like bad, right? We're going to be under pressure, we're going to have to find a tie, but they're usually enough that there's a couple ways to get a path to a tie that aren't that hard to find. So I think 6, 6, 7, 7, and 4 is not what I want to be playing. I'm not going to put pressure on my opponent by doing it. Their responses are, it's easy to play the next few moves for them, but probably am going to be able to finagle a tie with moves like this. All right, and we move to level 10. And again, we'll see a lot of overpowering can be recomboed. For instance, Rufus, 5, 6, 7A, can combo us if we take their starter with Chocobo Chick, 3, 6, 8A, and 2, or if we take it with Delita, 9, 5, 3A, and 2. So any of our captures in 2 are immediately comboed back by Rufus. Now you may, of course, notice, but we can combo Rufus. We can plus wall Rufus with A7, 4, 7. And then they can plus wall us with 9A, 3, 7, and 9. And maybe we survive those complications. Note, depending on how we take in 2, they might also, after we go in 6 there, have a combo in 5 as well as the combo in 9. There's some chance of surviving there. For instance, I wrote down a line here that I thought was interesting. Yeah, if they take with Delita 953A, if they take with Delita 953A, if they take with Chocobo Chick 368A, and we take back with Rufus in 3, comboing everything, and then they combo everything with, I'm forgetting who we and they are. We're the second turn player. Jeez, getting confused. Okay, so we take with 368A, they combo us with Rufus, 5, 6, 7A, and 3. We combo back with Amaranth, A7, 4, 7, and 6. They combo with 9A, 3, 7, and 9, and I believe we can play 9, 8, 8, 4, and 5, just capturing things and overpowering them at the end, and that, I think, is just a tie. But, we don't want to have to calculate out that far, right? You have to calculate a bunch of moves, you're trying to find your response to their starter, it's complicated. We're trying to be practical players who, use our time effectively. Because if we don't have a tie at the end there, we've just spent a few minutes trying to calculate out these complex lines where there's tons of combos and maybe they make a move that delays a combo or sets it up elsewhere, and you have to check those as well. And if you don't, you probably just lose on the spot. So even though this all may hold at the end and Chocobo Chick and 2 may tie, it is not a practical option. This is not what we want to be doing. So I do not like going in 2 here. I think it's just too much to calculate unless you're just great Sephiroth, basically. So I think for any normal player, a move in 2 is just not appealing. And if you are great Sephiroth, you probably found a better move somewhere else anyway. So let's look at captures in 4. If we capture in 4, they can only recapture with 6-2A9 if they don't want to be comboed, because Kelgur 8-3-8-9 we can combo with Chocobo Chick in 3. And that has an A facing towards the center. And we should think, yes, high center facing value, that's promising. But how do we take their starter from 4? A7, 4, 7, they can combo us back, because 9A, 3, 7 can plus wall the downward 4. And if we do it with 9, 5, 3A, then when they go 6-2, A9, and 2, they in fact do set up a combo in 5. So this doesn't look promising to me, and I think in general, the lines that require a lot of calculation because there are a million combos that can go in a chain is just not what we want to be doing. It's just asking us to calculate too much, and they get to look a move further in than we do, and so their calculation is much easier than ours. And unless you really have a lot of confidence in your calculation, just not the paths we want to go down. And if you do, again, they're probably better moves. So, okay, I don't think we want to take it here. All right, here's another one where we cannot take their corner starter, so this whole stuff is all irrelevant. Again, just want to stress, this happens sometimes. What can you do? All right, we have one way to take their starter. So we are going to be playing 6, 9, 7, 7, and 8. They have only one way to recapture it, 6, 2, A9, and 4. So it's a bit easier to see where the game is headed. We don't have a combo in 5 there. They don't have a combo in 5 there. It's all going to be about overpowering. There's not really high numbers facing 5, so in general we might be kind of skeptical. But I'm sort of glossing over the key point here, which is their card in 4 we can combo back from 3. 9, 8, 8, 4. Sorry, from 1. We can combo back. We can plus wall. That flips the card in 4, that flips the card in 7, and they're going to be in a pretty tough spot. And this is much like a lot of the times when we capture their starter by overpowering at these higher levels, they're able to combo back. Sometimes their plan of how to recapture, we can combo back. And so this is definitely a spot where we want to be capturing their starter. Yeah. And after we play in 1 as well, any way they could take from a 2, we can combo back from 3, which is even nicer, because Chocobo Chick combos both Rufus and 8-3-8-9. So this is a very pleasant spot to capture their starter, but you could reasonably say that's only because they didn't really plan out how to recapture it very well, which is fair, but that does happen. All right, we are nearing in on the end. We have almost gone through 25 moves. Here, A7, 4, 7, and 6, we've seen that gets plus walled. 9, 8, 8, 4, and 6, they can take back 2 different ways. 9, A, 3, 7, we can combo back. So more likely is Rufus, 5, 6, 7, A, and 2. And I don't really like our position. With our 4 facing towards 5, it's hard for us to build out. Looks pretty ugly to me. We can play Delita in 9 there. But I think not only do they have moves in 5, but they have moves in 5 that set up combos on our card in 9, so we don't have that much freedom in how to respond. We'll have to block 8. And usually if they can immediately kind of set up an attack on the safe corner we just played, and we have to defend it, it's not actually that safe because our options are going to be very limited. We're going to have to block access to it. So I don't love this position. And, you know, there might be ties there, but I think this one's not promising. And specifically because when they take in 5 with, say, 6, 8, 9, 5, they have a 9 facing down, and that sets up potential. Same against Delita in 9. Sorry, what about, we start with Delita in 9. This one I like. I think this is a fun one because it's kind of easy to see how we build up a phalanx. 2 cards next to each other with high outfacing value where they can both be attacked but neither can be taken. And that's because we can only capture from 6, and their recapture from 8 has a 9 facing up, and you'll notice they don't have anything that can take a 9 facing down. So we want to play in 6 in a way that won't give them a combo in 5 when they play 9, 8, 8, 4, and 8. So I think a very appealing move and a really good move is 6, 8, 9, 5, and 6. They recapture with 9, 8, 8, 4, and 8, and we can play 9, 8, 3, 7, and 7, and our 2 9s are facing up, and I think they're already in a really bad situation. So I think this is a nice spot to, build out, right? Have these high outfacing numbers that they can't deal with. Okay, Chocobo Chick. They cannot recapture their starter from 2. So it is very appealing to take in 6. And even more than that, so we want to be taking in 6, but they do get safety, right? So we play 9A, 3, 7, and 6, taking, you know, it's our only way to take. They play 9, 5, 3A, and 9. That's safe. They're doing okay here. We don't really have a great follow-up. We're a little bad going going right. So I don't love this spot for us. Like, we'll get a tie, but we won't get to put much pressure on. But yeah, we should take their starter. They can't really take back. Taking their starter is a very reasonable thing to play. And we are on to the final position. Phew. I don't know how long this video has gone. Okay. We can take their starter two different ways. 6, 8, 9, 5, and 8. They can combo back in 7 if they want, so that's pretty unappealing. So more appealing is 9A, 7, 3, and 8, or 9A, 3, 7. They can recapture with 9, 8, 8, 4 in 6. Now, what's the high number facing towards 5? Well, it's the 9, so the more likely way to build out is going to be to go in 7. So we have high numbers facing up. But what was the principle we learned earlier, or very long ago, right? We could try to build up. We don't actually have a great way to because we don't have that high upward value. For instance, our highest up left after we've gone in 8 and they've gone in 6 is an 8, and they have the same wall against that, and that's not very appealing. But it's to look at their hand and say, where are they directionally weak? Especially compared to where we're directionally strong. And we might look and say, they're bad going right and they're bad going down. It's hard to tell the difference. You know, they have similar power in both directions. But if we look at our hand, we're a lot better going left than we are up. So we should treat it like they have a right weakness because we're so much stronger going to the left while we're not that strong going up. So I think the sequence 9A, 3, 7, and 8, they recapture their starter, 9, 8, 8, 4, and 6. And then we play Rufus in 3. We have a safe card. There's some low out-facing numbers, but they're in a direction our opponent has trouble taking. And I think this is a pretty good spot. And I think one important line is against moves they could play in 5, capturing the card in 6. We can play 6, 2, A9, and 2, and I think that wins against all their options in 5 because they're just so bad going right, and that puts us up 6-4 and gives us a really nice situation. Oh, phew! We made it through 25 examples. I hope you found some of the spots where capturing was good and thought there's no way capturing is good, and some of the spots where there was no way capturing was good. So when was it good? Let's look at the instances when it definitely appealed. And we're not going to be counting the ones where they just did a terrible starter and of course we take it and, you know, any player would play it. But let's specifically do a quick check of each of the examples. So at the low level ones, it really ended up being, can we control 5? Can we stop them going, taking our next corner when we play it? And here I think a really nice sequence was 7, 5, 2, 5, and 4. They recapture their starter, and they can only recapture it with 3, 3, 7, 6, and 2, which is a 7 facing down, which means they didn't have any setup in 5, and we could now play in 3, capturing 2. They don't have any plays in 5, and all we had to make sure was they can't take our card in 3 without being comboed, and 4, 5, 3, 7 was the way to do it. So I think this was a nice one of all the understandings we had from the previous lectures, I guess. Paid off well and found a nice move. Here was another one where I think just all the stuff we've talked about paid off really nicely. We played 5, 2, 7, 5, and 4. They have to recapture with 7, 5, 2, 5, and 8. That has a 7 up. They have no combo in 5. And we could play in 9 next to their card with 6, 4, 2, 6. And we have these two safe cards in 8 and 9 and a really nice start. Red's gonna be struggling to tie there. So this one I thought was a nice example of they have a goofy hand and we can force a card out of their hand. I really like 8, 2, 6, 6, and 4 here because they have to recapture their starter, 5, 8, 2, 7, and 2. And that was their only card with left or right power really to any great extent. And so that drew out the kind of uniquest card in their hand, which really weakens their ability to do a variety of things. So I think this is a kind of cool one of the forcing nature of capturing a starter can mean they have to play a card that they would like to hold on to. So this was sort of the first or one of the first examples we saw of kind of we can take something, there are a bunch of weird out-facing values, but we find a safe corner at the end. And the idea here was to play 9, 1, 5, 8, and 4. They recapture their starter from 2. and then we play 7, 9, 5, 2, and 7 and just say, I have a safe card, and I think that's enough. And it's not going to be enough to really win ever, but it's usually going to be enough to hold a tie. And then this was another early one where we looked at, here's a way to build out. Here's a way to say, okay, I'm going to create safety for myself in a corner where I don't currently have safety. I want to play Sergeant Joe in 1. Sergeant Joe is not safe in 1 because 4 is unoccupied, so they could take it from 4. So I'm going to force them to occupy 4, and thus red plays 4, 4, 7A, and 8. They recapture 6, 6, 7, 7, and 4, and now Sergeant Joe, 4A, 9, 3, the Mighty Duck, is safe in 1. And it's not a great situation, but it's probably enough to tie. And again, at these higher levels, I think this type of move becomes less viable. I hope I explained why reasonably well. So this one was one where taking their starter was just excellent because their only way to recapture is when we can combo. They can only recapture in 4 with 6, 2, A9, and we can just combo the upward 6 with 9, 8, 8, 4, and they're in a lot of trouble. We've seen a lot of situations where we couldn't take a starter because they can just combo us without having to recapture from next to their starter. They could just combo the card we just played. And here is an instance where their intended recapture is something we can combo, and thus we get a big advantage out of it. And importantly, they have no move in 5 after this sequence. Here was a nice one of building out, what I keep calling building out, like building up a wall, where we see they can only recapture from 8 with 9, 8, 8, 4, and thus if we force that, we can then play in 7 with high up facing values they can't deal with. So we took their starters 6, 8, 9, 5, and 6, they recapture 9, 8, 8, 4, and 8, and we can play 9, 8, 3, 7, and 7 with a really nice position. And this last example, I think was kind of neat because we could force out most of their right power, that they had limited right power. And the sequence here was 9, 8, 3, 7, and 8. They play 9, 8, 8, 4, and 6. And we then play Rufus, 5, 6, 7, A, and 3. It is safe, and it pushes the game in a rightward direction, which they're not very strong to meet. So, phew, that was long. I think we saw some different ways for it to work, that at higher levels, capturing doesn't work as cleanly, and in random games, capturing, it's harder to control 5, and so we rely on safety and these kind of awkward moves more that I don't really personally like. So I think there were 4 or 5 examples in here where capturing I think was really appealing and a very strong move, and some of those I highlighted at the end. But a lot of them were kind of, we're going to build up a sort of awkward L where we have one safe corner and there's some weak numbers facing out, and we're going to hope that's enough. And I think those are playable, but not promising. And hopefully you did a good job separating here's options where there's nothing at all, here's options where it might be okay, but it's a little suspicious, and here's options where it's really good. Because I think situations where you can capture their starter, and it's one of the best moves, are probably like 15% of the time, maybe 20, maybe a little lower. So I'm not going to pretend it always applies. I think it does better in games with hands than it does in randoms. I think it does better with lower level games than it does in higher level games. So there is a reason I started by showing level 4 hands. And it was partially because I had the Homer hand, which was very much built to recapture itself, and I could show that these other hands could perform well against the Homer hand, forcing it to do what it's supposed to do best and still getting good results against it. But also this stuff does work cleaner at lower level, and it does work better in non-randoms. And so next time, if I keep on this theme, I may switch themes, but I may talk about dealing with half-strong corners. So when there is one high number facing out and one low number facing out, or weak corners where there are 2 low numbers facing out. And if I feel inspired to do that, I'll do that. Otherwise, I may move on next time to a different topic. But I hope you feel you got a good sense of when, why, how, what you're looking for when you capture a corner starter. Because I still think it's an underrated move, but I do think its viability depends on rule sets. That in low-level hand games, it's going to be a good move quite often. In high level random games, it's going to be a good move a lot less. And that jump may be, something like 30% to 10%, which still means one should keep an eye out for it. But the higher the level, having random on definitely makes it less often the right move.